Okay, so this chapter 28 is about a balanced scorecard. Maybe some of you have heard about the idea of balanced scorecards before. Some of you haven't. Probably in more of a management type class, we talk about these a little bit. So let's just jump into it. So a balanced scorecard is just a form of a performance measurement system. So to this point, most of the things we've been dealing with have been financial measurement systems, right? If you think about what accounting is, it's this constant attempt to know what's going on financially with a business. And so so that's what a performance measurement system is. It's a system that uses metrics or measures of current conditions or performance. Okay. So I'll just let you read that. I won't read it to you. So a balanced scorecard, what we're going to talk about today is probably the most commonly used. You'll see it at a lot of places where you could possibly work in the future. We have something like it here at the college. I don't know if we call it a balanced scorecard, but certainly we have something like it, okay? And the idea is that not all performance is financial, okay? That's just one part of it. And that there's probably non-financial things we do as a business or an organization that drive our financial success. And so we can't always just measure things, just financial things. And so the first sort of broad definitional separation is that some metrics are called leading indicators, which means if we do those now, we expect to see increases in financial performance in the future. Okay, maybe like recruiting, right? Would be I like to say, we know what drives our revenue, which is students at EAC. So recruiting, the number of contacts we make or the number of school visits we make or something like that might be a leading indicator of future revenue growth. Okay, and that's compared or contrasted, I guess, to what's called a lagging indicator, where it's indicative of something that we don't realize often has hurt us financially until after the fact, right? So like customer satisfaction, we can't really gather that until the people are already spent their money with us, and then we say, are you satisfied? And then we see it declining, and then we're like, wait a minute, so customer satisfaction is declining. And so we expect in the future, we're probably going to see other issues too. All right, so a balanced scorecard has all of these, I don't know what you want to call them, all of these different aspects or items, okay? So we kind of start with performance perspectives. This is how we build a balanced scorecard. And our performance perspectives will drive, I think they should put the arrows going around this way almost. They'll drive our strategic objectives. And strategic objectives will drive performance metrics. Performance metrics lead to strategic initiatives. Strategic initiatives to performance targets, strategy maps, measure maps. So this is this interrelationship between all of these things. Okay, so we'll just kind of go through each one. So typically, these are common performance perspectives that you'll see. So financial perspectives, which is ones we're probably most familiar with in an accounting course, but also internal processes, learning and growth, and then customer-related perspectives. So this is the broadest level on our performance scorecard. In other words, the broadest categories that we're going to kind of break things down into. So this is why we have performance perspectives, I guess, is what that slide's telling us. It's really normal, just so you know, if you ever are doing consulting for a business, it's really normal for business owners to only think in terms of financial success, right? Because ultimately, if you're not making money, you're like, why am I in business? And so sometimes having these perspectives helps us to sort of think outside of just the money box, okay? So the financial perspective, we tend to think of traditional accounting methods, things like revenues, profits, return on investment, all those things we've learned about for the last year. Customer perspective, we might think of like satisfaction or retention of customers, or something else, We have like Arthur, his mom has a business that we've talked about a number of times. And she makes jewelry and stuff like that she sells at like shows, right? And the question was, she has to pay to be in these shows. And the question is, like, if she could build a relationship with the customer at the show, and they really like her stuff and they really like her, and then she were to create an online or an Etsy or some other sort of way, could she sort of cut out the show, right? Could she just have a way of, so that might be a customer perspective. How do we build a relationship so that now I can just sell direct to these people? They like my product, they like me, what can we do? And certainly that would lead to financial things, right? But that's not the ultimate goal. I mean that is the ultimate goal, but the first goal is, how do we help these customers and how do we build relationships? Internal processes, things like operational efficiencies. How long does it take us to manufacture something? How long do things sit there, right? Just improving processes. And finally, learning and growth. Are we training our employees? Are we developing the way we should as a company? Again, those get overlooked a lot. You ever work at a place where they don't train you well? They just sort of throw you in and you're supposed to figure it out? Yeah, like most places, actually. Here, we're a learning institution. And when you get hired here at EAC, nothing, man. And that's one of our goals right now, is to improve we call it our onboarding process, right? Helping people just understand what they're getting into when they work here, and then how they get through things, because we haven't done it well in the past. Mostly because you think about it, when you're hiring, say, instructors, these are like career level professionals, people that have advanced degrees, master's degrees and doctorate degrees. And so you're kind of like, they're big kids and you throw them in there, but then they're like, hey, if I need to take college travel, what's the process I go through to just be able to, get a car and a hotel? And we haven't done a good job. So that's something we're trying to improve here. But at the same time, if you overtrain people, they hate it, right? So that balance is challenging. So after we get past our perspectives, then we get to strategic objectives. And strategic objectives define the purpose of an action taken within a company. Okay, so we're going to look at this Cord Your Toy. We're going to use this Cord Your Toy companies kind of as an example all the way through. And so you can, again, you see this broken down into their performance perspectives, learning and growth, internal processes, customer and financial. And then they have strategic objectives that go into those categories. So for learning and growth, they want to train their employees and reduce employee turnover. Internal processes, they want to improve delivery times and reduce shipping errors. For customer, they want to delight the customer, whatever that means, right? You always sit in these meetings, but strategic doesn't have to tell the whole story yet, right? It can be broad, but sometimes you sit in a meeting and you're like, what does that even mean? Like I would love to delight you students, but I would also love for you to get a credentials degree when you leave here. So sometimes I still have to give you work, so we're trying to find that balance. Did you have a question? Yeah, employee turnover is how often do people leave your company, right? So like EAC, as an example, in our community, at the faculty level and professional level, has very low employee turnover. People stay here for years and years and years. But at the professional support staff level, we have relatively higher turnover than we do and so, we have this question: why do teachers stay forever, but secretaries and office staff turn over more, right? And so that's something we're trying to tackle. We're looking at pay across the board in those areas and say, are we paying our teachers? Certainly it's a different scale, but yeah, so those are real things we're dealing with here at the college right now. So sometimes you could have a good average turnover, but if you look deeper, you realize in some parts of the institution, you have fast or heavy turnover, and in other parts it's slow, and so your average looks okay. And then finally, their financial is they want to increase profits. So there's their strategic objectives. And so our strategic objectives, we're going to generate or create performance metrics. In other words, how can we measure these things? Are we being successful at improving? Now, I don't love all these. So for employee training, median training hours per employee, that's their metric. That's a little bit like ugh. So it's like, if we're falling short, we're just going to give you more training. Like, but what if more training isn't necessary? We want to have like the right amount of training per employee, but that's their metric. Turnover, average employee tenure. So how often on average does an employee stay here? Again, I just said that wouldn't work at EAC because we have two kind of vastly different categories of employees. If you ask the average faculty member, do you love working at EAC? I think they'd be like, yeah, I'm left kind of, I've given a lot of freedom to teach my classes the way I want. I love the students, they're engaged, and but I've heard that some people who work secretarial and stuff here don't love it here. Not, but I don't know on average, just some people are like, ugh. And so probably for us, average employee turnover or tenure wouldn't be a good metric. We would have to find some other way to measure, or maybe just split it, right? We're going to look at faculty in one way, and we're going to look at, we call them PSS, OSS, professional support and operational support staff. Their metrics for improving delivery times is hours from order to delivery. How long does it take us to get an order out the door? Reduce shipping errors, the number of erroneous shipments. Makes sense. And so forth. Percentage of customers who shop again. That's how they want to measure if customers are delighted. That might be good. It might just mean, have you ever bought from a place that you think their service actually kind of sucks, but you really like their product? Sure, that happens. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm delighted. But, and then online customer satisfaction rating. Okay, so now we have two metrics, and taken together, they might tell us more, right? If people are buying again and they're rating us high, okay, that starts to be a better sign. And then for financial, they want market share, which means of the toy market, what percentage of that, if, in other words, you kind of take the total sales of toys across the whole country and say, well, what percentage of that are we? Are we gaining in that, or are we losing in that? And then operating profit. So there's their metrics. And then metrics often drive strategic initiatives. And I think some of the people would debate and say, I don't know that the metric drives that. But honestly, what I've seen, at least in most organizations, is we're trying to improve this metric. And so we create this initiative to do something that we think will improve the metric. Okay. So for example, they want to improve the hours from order to delivered. So they have this strategic initiative to automate the warehouse, right? Have, I don't know, robots that go pick the stuff off of the shelves and package it, or at least bring it to the packaging area or something like that. That might be a form of, that would be a strategic initiative. We have strategic initiatives here at the college. Our big one right now is transitioning to a 4-year institution, right? That was one that we didn't have this plan for. Like, it didn't actually get pulled from a performance metric or from a strategic objective. It kind of, the law changed. And then it was like, well, I guess we better figure out how we're going to do this, right? And so, so that happens too. Sometimes external forces thrust strategic objectives or strategic initiatives upon you, where you're like, COVID did that, right? Where suddenly we have the law changing, and we're like, how do we safely have school, right? So sometimes external forces impact these too. All right, so performance targets are what it sounds like, okay? These are levels or rates of improvement that we want to try to meet. So we're going to look at those metrics and say, here's where we are now, here's where we would like to be, right? It's a goal. So the performance target is. A lot of places will link them to incentives and compensation. We don't have that here, but like where my son works, they get, or my son-in-law, he works for APS, and they get paid more if they meet their goals. Okay, they get a bonus. All right, so now we have these performance targets added as another layer onto here. So their median training hours per employee, 100 hours a year, or like, what is that? Like, I don't know. That's a lot. And so forth. You can see all those are the different performance targets they've set. We don't have all their info, so we don't know what they were before, but you get the idea. Okay. When you think about, a major function of managers is what's called controlling. Okay. And controlling means after we've made goals, we're going to hold to the goals. That's what controlling is. We're going to do the things we need to do to actually achieve the goals. It's actually a hard part in management. It seems easy, but think about your own life. When you set goals, I'm going to, a New Year's resolution or something, I'm going to study every day, or I'm going to lose 10 pounds or whatever. Like, that's challenging sometimes, right? And then try to do that for when you're parents, to do that for a whole family, because no matter what goal you set, your teenage kids will probably not like it because you set it. And so they'll buck at it, and they'll give you difficulty every time you try to say, remember, we all said we were going to do this. And then take that to an organization level, right? EAC, anytime our senior executives try to come up with some initiative, there will always be people that are like, why do we have to do that, right? Or that's the wrong way to go about doing this. And so a big part of management is keeping people on control. And so sometimes, even if they don't like for me, even if I don't like an initiative, say, I'm pretty goal driven. So if you give me a goal that's attainable, I'll probably work toward it, right? And I'll guide the people I manage to work for it. So that's part of why performance targets matter. All right. And so then they create what's called, where are they at? A strategy map. And all a strategy map really does is it tries to look at how these things tie into each other. Like, we think learning and growth, so training employees better, is going to lead to improved delivery times and reduced errors. That's logical, right? That flows. Reduced employee turnover also, right? If we have more experienced employees because they're not leaving and we're not constantly having to hire new ones, that's going to lead there. And then improved delivery time and reducing errors is going to lead to delighting the customer more. And reducing shipping errors directly will increase our profits, just because the costs of shipping errors, and delighting the customers should lead to increasing profits. So that's what we mean when we say a strategy map, right? This is how all of these things tie together. And you notice they always lead to the ultimate goal, right? In the end, which is improving financial performance. Some people feel like this is a little mercenary, right? The idea that, like, even if I want to make my customers happy, it's really only for the ultimate purpose of making more money. Even if I only want to make my employees happy, it's only for the ultimate purpose. I should care about people, just for people. And there are companies who try to sort of fold that way of thinking into their culture, and some do it better than others. And I agree with it generally, but I also think if you're not making money in the end, then none of it matters, because all those happy employees are out of a job, right? So you've at least got to make enough to keep the doors open. And so that, finding that balance, I do some work with nonprofits, and you have people in nonprofits that are almost like offended at the notion that we have to make money. Like, but we're a nonprofit. And I'm like, well, we have expenses. You just always think that way because you're the accounting guy. And it's like, well, kind of, maybe, but like, even like our little soccer league, if we don't have enough for uniforms and balls and soccer goals and to pay the county park system so that we can play there, then nobody plays soccer, right? Even if it's all just for the love of the game, we at least have to break even in a nonprofit. And so, I guess what I'm saying is, you will sometimes get pushed back by people who don't like the idea that our strategy map is always leading toward increasing profits. And I try to hear them out, because I agree that sometimes I get overly focused on that. Like, I really do think I should try to delight customers just for the sheer joy of seeing delighted customers. You know what I mean? And sometimes, like for me, with our soccer league as an example, we have 800 or 900 kids playing soccer. I referee and coach at the highest level. Every once in a while, I'll take a trip down to the 4 and 5-year-old fields, just because. And they're not, I mean, I suppose they're revenue drivers in the sense that they're going to keep playing and paying fees each year, but they're just adorable to watch play soccer, and they just love kicking the ball. You know what I mean? And so I think there's an element in that in every business. I don't know about my storage business. Like, I just love watching people store their stuff. It's just so beautiful. But it sometimes, actually, that would always come when we would have an auction, and we'd be, we would auction their thing off because they wouldn't pay. And then the guy who bought it would be like, hey, here's a box of stuff, like personal stuff that I can't make any money on. And it's like, and you're looking at it and it's like family photos of their kids. And that's when you realize the stuff that people store is meaningful to them, right? They wouldn't pay money to store it if it was just trash, which isn't necessarily true because there's a lot of trash in those things too. But so there's still a personal aspect always, even in a business like storage. It's not all money, but money matters. All right. And then a measure map, which is very similar. You'll see in how things are interrelated, which tell us that we think that these measures, like of employee training and employee tenure, are going to impact these other measures. And you'll see that they often mirror the strategy map. Occasionally, things won't have the exact same link. Let's see if there's any place where it's different. Let's see, hours from ordered to delivered. That goes there, there. So they're pretty tied into each other. It's just a more numerical way of looking at it, right? Like, do I think this number will drive this number? All right. So involved in all this is what we call strategic learning, which is we go through these goals and we're trying to improve things. And then we have to kind of measure and say, did we actually improve things? And if so, was it because of the reasons we thought? And if not, well, why? And what can we do about it? So they give us an example, I think, here. Let's see. So here they say the lack of statistical support for a relationship among performance metrics does not necessarily mean that the strategic objective is flawed. For example, the lack of statistical support may occur because the performance metric does not accurately measure the strategic objective. And then we can be like, oh, well, we can adjust that, right? In other cases, there may be a time lag or other issues. But again, so much of what we do in business is, especially on the accounting side, is we're not necessarily fixing the errors. We are finding areas to investigate, right? We're saying this link doesn't seem to be what we thought it would be. We improved this area, we got people more trained, but we're still having shipping errors. So why? And then we can dig in more deeply. But a lot of times you can't discover those things until you try, right? Until you say, I think what's causing this is that we're constantly trying to train new people. So let's cut down employee turnover and improve our training and see if that improves it. And if it does, awesome, we figured it out. And if it doesn't, then we may have to adjust. So yeah, even giant multi-billion-dollar corporations, there's still sometimes an element of trial and error, right? Of just saying, we have a theory, we're going to test that theory through this way, and then we're going to learn from it. That's the idea of strategic learning. So here's their example they give. They have statistical analysis to verify expected relationships between its performance metrics and its strategic objectives. Assume the analysis support most relationships. However, an increase in online customer satisfaction did not seem to generate an increase in operating profit. So we would have to say, well, why? If people are more satisfied, wouldn't we think that they'd be buying more from us and so forth? And so with some investigation, so there's just some possible reasons they come up with. And with some investigation, they find out that the sales team, whenever someone would mark that they weren't satisfied, the sales team would call them, which is awesome, and say, hey, we'll let you keep the merchandise and we'll give you a full refund if you give us a better feedback rating. And we'll talk about cognitive biases that happen when we're trying to measure these things. And so I guess this becomes a training issue, right? But probably if we're measuring customer satisfaction and the sales team gets a bonus based on that, then they start to think that customer satisfaction is the end goal, instead of like, no, it's one measurement of the end goal. And we have that a lot here at the college because we're all in these separate departments. And so every department's sort of like working toward its own improvement. And usually that's great, but occasionally we might kind of step on a higher level goal because what we were trying to do, people try to manipulate the system and try to, do good with numbers. I think one thing that we've sort of backed off on here at the college is we had this goal to improve DFW rates. I think I've told you guys about DFW rates before. A DFW rate is if we take a class, so this class, for example, we started with 15 students and one person has withdrawn from the class, right? And she withdrew because she said, I've decided after taking these classes that I think I don't really love business and I want to study something else. To me, that's a win. She's figuring out what she wants, right? That's a good thing, right? But that goes as like a black mark against us. Why is your DFW rate higher? Now, it doesn't really, because the goal was to improve them, and only one out of a class of 15 is a relatively low DFW, right? D means people who score Ds, F means people who score Fs, and W are people who withdraw. But guess what they figured out started happening when they really started pushing improving DFW rates? What do you think? What do you think are some possible things that could happen? Teachers were passing students who probably should not have passed, right? Students who weren't coming to class, who weren't doing the work. And the teachers were like, well, I'll just give them a C, right? And while the student might like that, it's probably not good for the student. It's not good for the institution. And, especially if that student decides to transfer later and doesn't have some basic level of knowledge, and that's not good for anybody, right? If our reputation were to drop off and people say, oh, EAC's crap, nobody learns anything there, and the student can't succeed at the next level. And so you have to be careful when you set these goals and your metrics for measuring them, because there's almost always unintended consequences as well as the intended consequences. All right. So in this case, they found out that their sales team, in an effort to bolster those scores and meet their goals, was doing things that didn't help the strategic plan. Okay. So they had to correct that. So one other concept is what's called scorecard cascading. And scorecard cascading just means we use multiple scorecards and then being divided up. So like the college could have its overall scorecard, and then they'd say, well, which of these would the business division impact, right? And so they would build a scorecard for us that would be our sorts of things that we know what we're being measured on. And that's not a bad thing to do, so long as it all works together and it starts doesn't start to fight against each other, right? All right. So that last example where we found out that one department was kind of, defeating the purpose of our whole scorecard is an example of something we call a cognitive bias. And, the most common cognitive bias that we have outside of business is that we tend to see the world through our own eyes, and we tend to almost always assume that the way we do things is better than the way other people do things, right? That's a cognitive bias. We don't always see things as fully and clearly as we should. So that's the idea of what a cognitive bias is. So the three that I just want to talk about real quick in these chapters are what's called motivated reasoning, surrogation, and common measures bias. Again, this is a little outside of this whole chapter is a little bit outside of the realm of like an accounting class, right? It starts to sound more like a management course. But motivated reasoning is where we see what we want in the data, right? You see this a lot among gamblers and business people and athletes, interestingly. If I go out and I was a discus thrower in high school, if I go out and I throw the discus 15 times at practice, and 2 of those times I hit 140, and then 2 of those times I hit 100 because they were bad throws, and then the rest of them were around 119. And my coach says, how'd you do today? What am I going to tell the coach? What do you think I'm going to tell the coach? Through 140. right? And then when I go to the track meet and I'm hitting 119, which is solidly in my median, or 120, the coach is like, where's your 140s at, right? I watch this all the time as a coach. People tend to report their successes. It's the Instagram effect, right? We show pictures of our life at its highest and best and noblest moments, most exciting moments, and it leads the rest of the world to think that everybody's living that life instead of their normal mundane lives. We do the same thing with data, okay? We tend to see what we want to see in the data and report what we think other people want to hear. So we ignore bad news or rely too heavily on good news. We stop gathering information when results look good, or we give people full refunds and let them keep the product if they'll just tell us what we want to hear, right? That sort of thing. We all do this. Okay, so that's motivated reasoning. It is just part of human nature. There's really some neat classes on sort of like, there's a course called, when you get it to like university level, called organizational behavior. It's a kind of a business / psychology course, and that's some interesting stuff. And then there's one on what's it called? Consumer behavior. So how people buy and the whole process people's brains go through as they choose what to buy. Fascinating stuff that I think is interesting. So let's see. So here's just an example of motivated reasoning. They gather this data, right? And so this is, remember, they wanted to make it faster between when they got orders and when they got them delivered. And so they gather this data, and what they did is a pilot program. So warehouses 1 through 5 use the automated system of picking the stuff off the shelves and packaging it, and 6 through 10 did not. And so they get this data, right? Here's the hours from order to deliver. And then here's the number of errors in the shipments. And so probably if you're the boss in 1 through 5, you're going to focus on this number, right? That looks like a clear improvement. You're not going to focus on this one. You should say, well, we sped up, but like we ended up with a lot more errors. And you should be saying, so what does that mean and how do we improve it? But instead, probably, again, if your bonus is related to it, you're going to be like, no, look how fast we were. Okay, that's the idea of motivated reasoning. So there was an improvement in hours, but not an improvement in errors, and even a worsening, I guess, of errors. And so that's the idea of motivated reasoning. The second is surrogation, and that's the tendency to behave like performance metrics are the strategic objectives. That's kind of what I described with our DFW rate here, right? Is we got this goal to improve this, and we didn't have a lot of great context other than we knew that, in essence, what they would do is they would take a list of all the divisions at the college and just like rank them in order of DFW rate, and then put that out there, right? And it would be like, and then my boss would be like, whoa, why are you in like the, you know, the lower quartile? Why is your division so much worse than everybody else on average? And it's a fair question, right? We should be asking ourselves. And of course, I would be like, well, because we're not going to just, you know, we want the business degree to mean something, and we're not just going to give it away to people that if people aren't willing to do the work, then they're going to fail the class. Like that was our response. And, you know, and then we were seen as being difficult rather than seen as like, we tried to see ourselves as like this bastion of keeping academic rigor in our program, right? And probably the truth is somewhere in the middle of both of those, that there are things we could improve. And that's the intent of it, right? Reaching out to a student who's struggling, that will improve DFW rates. You know, a lot of times people are just going through a hard time for a week. And as a teacher, you can be like, not my problem. Or you could be like, hey, I care about you. I mean, because legitimately, I do care about my students, so I can do that. You know, so, you know, again, with surrogation, what we want to do is, if you're the high up leadership, you've got to communicate like why the goals. The why really helps people, because when you understand, oh, that's why we're measuring this. oh, then they're less likely to fudge or less likely to find ways around it. Okay. And then if you're a manager at the operational level, you've got to be committed to that, like saying, this is about our improvement, not about how we can manipulate the numbers to make ourselves look like we improved. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to go religious, but anybody who's served a mission knows what I'm talking about. There are people who are trying to really improve and people who are trying to make the numbers look as good as they can make them. And most of us are doing some of both, right? Because we don't want to be called out in a meeting as to why our numbers stunk or whatever. But these things happen in all organizations, even with good people who are truly motivated by what they consider to be a good cause. We're still also motivated by our pride and we don't want to look bad. All right. And now that's more surrogation. So yeah, again, the idea that we're just trying to think of the rating or the metric as if it is the true aim instead of realizing it's a part of a broader purpose. And then the last one is common measures bias. And there's others, okay, but these are three very common ones, okay? So common measures bias is where we start to like a lot of times we're measuring all of our divisions on certain things, like BFW rate, but then each division might have other things that we're measuring too that are unique to that division. And so you tend to focus on the thing that's common to everybody because it allows you to compare everybody. And so you might miss successes on the individual level and end up like giving a bonus to the manager of this department when everybody knows they kind of suck, but they're just really good at that one thing, right? I think they did an example in here. I won't go through their whole example of like what happens usually is when you give a bunch of these to managers, all these goals, they'll look at them and be like, which one will be easiest for me to affect an increase in, right? So like training hours, that's easy. I can give more training hours to my employees. And so I force my employees to do more training hours, or I even fudge the idea of what training is, right? Like if you're working on a new process, that's training or whatever, right? That sort of stuff happens. And then all of a sudden, look, I've got 110 training hours. Everybody else only has 100. And it's like, yeah, but you're not actually your errors didn't get reduced, which is what we were hoping training would do. And your what do they call it? Your process time didn't improve. And so, but a lot of times, because every division's processes are different, the only thing management can compare them to is the training time. And so they give an award to this guy because he improved his training time, even though his processes didn't get better. And that kind of kills morale for the whole organization when that goes on. And again, you can probably think of examples where you've seen similar things where someone's being lauded as the success when everybody knows, well, they just did this. I could do that, but I'm trying to be honest about the process or whatever. Okay. I'm gonna go skip through that. All right. Oh yeah. So this is the example I was talking about. So here you have the warehousing and sales department, and you see that they have the median training hours and average employee tenure, but then these measures are different. Okay. And so management will often focus on the ones that are common, and that's not always the best way to do it. So that's the idea. All right. One last concept. Corporate social responsibility. This is, I'll say, a relatively new way of thinking. I mean, there were companies that were way ahead of this and were doing this 50 years ago. But you know, this is really a last 30 years sort of, and even in the last 20 where there's been a push. The challenge with corporate social responsibility is we don't all fully agree on what social responsibility means, right? You'll see some companies really pushing say LGBTQ equality and access as part of their social responsibility programs. Other companies are like, that's not our focus, right? We were going to focus on environmental impact or whatever. And so, but that's okay if it's a self-dictated goal, right? So the idea is, and you'll see on a lot of these balanced scorecards, some type of social responsibility or sustainability sort of targets as well. Think of somebody like Walmart. They're massive and they're everywhere. They have the ability to leverage their power and size to make the world better, right? And so the argument is they should. They, or some people even say they have an obligation to do so. Nike, right? They're outsourcing all of their labor to overseas factories. What responsibility do they have to make sure child labor is not being used in those factories? Because they're big enough and powerful enough that if they went into a factory and found child labor being used there after they'd said, made everybody agree they wouldn't, and they just cut that factory off and said, we're not using you anymore. Do you think other factories would want to keep Nike's business, right? And if they went in and said, hey, we noticed you're still using child labor. Is it because we're not paying you enough? I mean, like, do we need to renegotiate the contract to make sure that you can afford to do this with appropriate age or whatever, right? And so this is the idea behind corporate social responsibility. Organizations are building, just you might see as you look at some of these balanced scorecards, that they have social responsibility, often environmental or things like that, worked into their plans. And so I wanted to familiarize you with this term. It's called triple bottom line. Because you used to always think of the bottom line, right, which is the net income number on an income statement. That's where that term comes from. When people are saying, hey, Tom, just give me the bottom line, which means cut to the chase and tell me what this is about. That originally came from the idea of the bottom line of an income statement tells you what you really need to know. Did we make a profit or did we have a loss? All right. So now there's this idea of triple bottom line, which is financial performance, social performance, and environmental performance. And many of the big companies have shifted to this way of thinking. And it's true, if you've ever had a small business or you are related to someone who has a small business, you know, if I'm El Charo making Mexican food down on Main Street in Safford, I don't know what power I have over the environmental policies of my suppliers and things like that. You know, if I were to like, I'm going to stop buying from you, that would be hard, especially when there's really only one or two suppliers that even service this area. But they might still, it's possible a small company could be like, we want to do our part. So we're going to use paper straws. Those are terrible, by the way, but we're going to use paper straws instead of plastic straws or whatever, right? We're going to set some little goal to be a little bit more environmentally sustainable. In social performance, same idea, right? We're going to do some things to ensure that, I don't know, that that we're promoting women or people of other races or whatever at the same, that they're getting the same opportunities for promotion. And here's what we're going to put in place to do that or whatever, right? Those would be a social thing. So that's the idea of triple bottom line, but a small company has their small impact. So you're seeing more of this on these big major multinational corporations, the Walmarts of the world and the Nikes and the Coca-Colas and you know, they have the ability to really make massive impacts. What's that? Disney. No, and you're seeing how their attempt, that's a good example, their attempt to sort of stand up for a cause that that their leadership have felt was very important is creating a lot of controversy right now, right? Some of which, I don't know, I think it remains to be seen if it's going to hurt or help them. You have the governor of Florida going, well, if you want to be involved in politics, then we're just going to pull this special treatment we've been giving to you away. And I'm just like, no, I'm just going to, for me, it's like, I'm like that Kermit the Frog who's sipping the Lipton tea. Like, you're just gonna be like, how does this all play out? Because it's way over my pay grade, but it's kind of interesting to watch. Yeah. So if you have social goals that go against the social goals of a big chunk of your customer base, that could potentially harm you, right? And so you have to be careful and make sure that's there.